On today's Locked On Texans podcast, Cody and I discuss the young pups for the Texans wide receiver core. What is the plan for John Metchie when he's on the field, and who's more valuable to the Texans in their rookie year, Tank Dell or Xavier Hutchinson?
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody, to a Wednesday episode of the Locked On Texan podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to take this time to shout out our everydayers from the Himalayas. And if you are new to the Locked On Texan podcast, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube, and also subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I am your Texans football analyst, John Some Sports Guy Hickman, and of course, I'm joined by none other than Sports Illustrated's own and Texan Credential Media member, Cody Davis, here to discuss who's next to be in line for a contract extension. But today's show is really centered around the wide receivers, saving the Texans wide receiving corps. Who's going to be that diamond in the rough for this team? But we're going to get it kicked off with John Metchie and discussing whether or not he is an inside or an outside receiver. When looking at John Metchie, Cody, listeners and viewers at home, who between Coach D'Amico Ryans and General Manager Nick Caserio, it's been confirmed that he will be available for training camp in July, bearing any setbacks. There are some unknown expectations for this young man. And Cody, this is where I insert you really quick. What do you always say whenever we discuss John Metchie?
Make sure you lower the expectations.
Yeah, absolutely, and make sure you give that young man some time. But I think the biggest unknown is how the Texans will use John Metchie once he returns on this team that features rookie wide receiver Tank Dell, and I think those are two guys with similar height and play styles. And without seeing him go through any of the OTAs or mini camps, will he be featured inside or outside? I think Houston will want to first and foremost work to get him comfortable in that offense. But guys, long term, I think the plan for John Metchie isn't necessarily to have any shackles on his feet, gonna let him dance. I think he's going to be both an inside and an outside receiver at the NFL level. At Alabama, John Metchie was only featured in the slot 228 times through 3 seasons compared to nearly 600 lying wide out. But for this offense, John Metchie does two things great. Number one, being able to pick up that yak, right? Second, in the SEC in 2021 in terms of yak yardage, and getting open quickly due to his ability to run routes. I'll say this right now. Whenever he gets healthy, I think the competition of who's the better route runner on this team between John Metchie, between Tank Dell, that's going to be fun and interesting because both of those guys run routes very good. But his ability to run routes in order to get open, where he's had some moments where he's led Alabama in average depth of target, which indicates the amount of yards downfield a player was targeted on average. In 2020, he led that team in 12.7. 2021, in his final year, he wasn't even top 5. So you're looking at a player that can get it done down the field and be effective. And you're looking at a guy in 2021, before he had that ACL injury, the average depth, I believe, for him was 8.8 in terms of the ADOT. But he led, again, the SEC, was second in the SEC in yards after catch. His ability to get open is phenomenal. I think, again, second to none on this team if we're going based off what we've seen from him in the past. So I don't see an outside. I don't see an inside. I see John Metchie being a true, versatile, X-factor receiver that this franchise needs. I kind of would put you in the mind of, imagine the 2019 Robert Woods in that the Rams offense, when he was motioning and being able to kind of cut on a dime and get open on some of those whip routes. And Matthew Stafford or Jared Goff or whoever he was playing with at the time, they were able to find him quickly in open space. Open space and John Metchie go together like hot dogs and ketchup, right? It just works. And again, he's a guy that with Bobby Slowick and what we presume this offense is going to look like, guys, imagine him in a bunch offense, bunch formation. Imagine him lining up outside but motioning inside, right? Some of these things to get really creative with him because it's not necessarily Metchie's speed, right? He never got an opportunity to run the 40 coming out because of the ACL injury. It's how quick he is with the ball in his hand and his cuts to get to where he wants to go and get upfield, right? So that's the guy. You just want to get him the ball, whether that's inside or out, and allow him to make some plays.
I definitely agree that the Houston Texans are going to use John Metchie as a versatile wide receiver because his player comparison reminds me of a Brandon Cooks. And that's not me just saying that. I remember last year at the start of training camp, we had an opportunity to talk to Brandon Cooks day one. Of course, this was, I think, 2 or 3 days after the unfortunate news of John Metchie came out. Brandon Cooks said that he was starting to spend a lot of time with John Metchie because Metchie reminded him of himself as a smaller wide receiver who can be used as an outside and inside receiver. And that's very important because just take a look at the career that Brandon Cooks has had. He's going into his 9th season, if I'm not mistaken, and he has already recorded 6 seasons where he has caught for over 1,000 yards. John, you mentioned Robert Woods. I'm just go and take a look at what Brandon Cooks was able to do in that offense, playing with the Los Angeles Rams. I believe that was the same season where they made the Super Bowl, correct? And they ended up losing to Kansas City?
No, that was the Rams when they lost to the New England Patriots.
New England Patriots, okay. So that alone shows you that if everything with John Metchie continues to be on track, and as of right now, Coach D'Amico Ryans and his staff did confirm during mandatory camp that John Metchie wasn't out there due to a hamstring injury he sustained doing before voluntary OTA. So that's part of the reason why he wasn't out there. He is still recovering from that. But John Metchie is a guy to where if he continues to develop and he has no setbacks, this conversation that we're having right now, who's going to be wide receiver number 1, who's going to be wide receiver number 2, and all this other stuff, all of that is definitely going to go down the drain because, John, listeners and viewers, all you have to do is take a look at that young man's career. The final 2 years playing in Alabama, I believe his sophomore campaign, he finished with like 900 and something yards, and his final season, he finished with over 1,000. You know what him and Bryce Young was able to do on the field. Now he's going to be on the field with C.J. Stroud, another good up-and-coming quarterback. The future is bright for John Metchie. I'm just praying that this young man can stay healthy and everything else in between.
The one thing that I like about John Metchie is, like, you look at the talent he played with while he was at Alabama. In 2021, Jamison Williams, who we know went to the Detroit Lions, right? But in 2020, played with Devontae Smith, played with Jalen Waddle, 2 first-round picks at wide receiver, right? And he was just able to come in and kind of do his own thing and figure it out, right? And so these were guys that were just – and let me see right here. Yeah, he had more yards than Jalen Waddle that year. So Metchie is a guy that I really love, man. It doesn't matter where you line him up on a field. I think that you just want to make sure you get him the ball and find ways to get him in open space. I mean, I haven't seen too many wide receivers at the college level run some of those short yardage routes as good as John Metchie with his ability to stop on a dime and change directions. I think that's one of his best attributes. And then again, looking at how he played with Devontae Smith. And what makes me kind of happy about it is Devontae Smith had questions about his size coming into the NFL because he's so slender, right? So when I look at a John Metchie, I look at a guy that may not be as slender, right? John Metchie has a little bit more muscle on him, but he's only 5'11" with cleats on, I believe. But again, you can line him up outside, and he was effective at Alabama for 2 years. in the SEC, being able to get down the field when needed, but more importantly, create those yards after catch. Like that is what this offense is going to be predicated around. Imagine John Metchie coming across to your quarterback, CJ Stroud, is beating the blitz, and he has John Metchie coming across on a drag. I think that's a win, right? We've seen him take a drag route, barely beating the blitz, coming off and taking it 40, 50 yards down the field. We've seen it at Alabama, and I don't think it too much will change in the NFL once he actually gets his feet wet, which is why, again, Cody, what do you always say?
Lower your expectations. We are all excited for this young man. And I still believe that, of course, like I mentioned, if everything continues to go well for John Metchie, his health and staying healthy, I believe he is still on the trajectory to have a phenomenal career. But at least in 2023, we got to lower this expectations. This is why we're looking at the future of what John Metchie could potentially be for the Houston Texans. But, you know, I just can't wait to see him for training camp, man. Which, by the way, that's going to be the first time we have an opportunity to really talk to him since the day he got drafted, if I'm not mistaken.
It's been a while. It's been a while. Baseball is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on all of the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. All of my Houston Astro fans, I know y'all been kind of pissed at the Astros as of late. Go ahead and bet whether or not Jose Altuve will get a couple of hits in the game, or will the pitching get better. I don't know the over-under on strikes, but you can definitely find all of that over at FanDuel. And again, you don't want to miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball and the NFL.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this Wednesday installment of Locked On Texans. John, I want to continue our conversation talking about the Houston Texans wide receiver core. But before we do this, ladies and gentlemen, this is another reminder that the Houston Texans are a new franchise. If you look back in the 2000s, the 2010s, and even the last 3 years, they always had a #1 wide receiver, Andre Johnson, D-Hop, and Brandon Cooks. And what was the conversation then? Who's going to be wide receiver #2? Do the Houston Texans actually have enough depth at that position? In 2023, the conversation has flipped. We have talked about the talent that they have at this wide receiving core, but now we're asking who's going to be wide receiver #1. I find that a little bit funny because throughout this whole entire year, basically ever since the hiring of DeMeco Ryans, we have talked about the newness of the Houston Texans, whether good and bad. And this is one of a new conversation that's kind of unfamiliar for this franchise.
Yeah, it is.
But moving on, you know, we talked about John Metchie, and once he gets his feet wet, I truly do believe that he's going to take the helm as this team's #1 wide receiver. Hopefully him and Nico Collins can be, you know, wide receiver 1. And
by the way, Nico Collins was on pace for 119 targets in 9 games last year when he was healthy. If CJ Stroud, this is funny because I saw this in a tweet, 62% of his passes last year were not catchable.
62. Well, no. Looking at what I looked at OTAs and at minicamp, that's not going to be an issue for Nico Collins for this upcoming season. but like I mentioned, man, you know, once John Metchie gets his feet wet in the NFL, I truly do believe that he has the potential to be this team's #1 wide receiver, or at least share that responsibility with Nico Collins. And I think that's possibly could be best case scenario, because the more weapons you have, the more dangerous your offense can be. And John, with that being said, I do want to take a look at Xavier Hutchinson and Tank Dell, because on yesterday we closed out the show talking about how it was ESPN, if I'm not mistaken, or was it Pro Football
PFF?
Focus? Pro Football Focus ranked the Houston Texans wide receiving core as the worst in the league. We agree with the statement, but John, I do wonder how much can Tank Dell and Xavier Hutchinson help the Texans wide receiving core just as rookies. Now, you know me, I'm all about giving rookies an opportunity to learn and develop. I truly do believe that at least midway through this upcoming season that we're going to be looking at Xavier Hutchinson and Tank Dell as two players who's definitely going to step up and help not just that position group, but this offense move the chain. You take a look at Xavier Hutchinson. He's another big body receiver. If I'm not mistaken, when you look at the listing, I think he is the second tallest wide receiver behind Nico Collins. He's coming in at 6'3". Nico is 6'4". So that is another red zone target for CJ Stroud or Davis Mills or whoever's going to be starting at center between those two, CJ Stroud. But that is definitely going to be another target for CJ. And when you take a look at Tank Dell, I think he has the potential, along with Amari Rodgers, to be a very reliable slot receiver for this upcoming season.
So if the conversation right now is saving the wide receivers, and I guess in terms of for the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tank Dell isn't a receiver that this team is going to save in terms of kind of like stashing them away. I don't think so. I think that we're going to see Tank Dell play a good amount of snaps this year for Houston. I think that when you look at, they traded up for him, and I think Tank Dell would have been available by the time that they wanted to draft him, honestly. So they traded up for him. They believe in him, and they believe that he's a guy that, just like John Metchie, you want to get him out in space, and he's going to be a playmaker that can take something from underneath and then take it down the field, right? So that's what you want in this type of offense. So I think we're going to see him. But Houston does have an Xavier Hutchinson. I'm going to throw in Jerry Wayne from Pitt. They do have some bigger guys that at the wide receiver position that I think will have true benefit from being on this practice squad, mainly Jerry Wayne. And then I look at the conversation of, well, Noah Brown, 6'2", I think 225. He's a bigger receiver. Does he have higher upside and a higher ceiling than Xavier Hutchinson? Or does he just fit into what this team needs from their receivers down the field? Like, do I think Xavier Hutchinson or Tank Dell or Jerry Wayne or John Metchie, when he gets out on the field, do I think they block down the field better than Noah Brown? Absolutely not. So what are they doing in order to beat out Noah Brown? Because I think that Noah Brown is at his ceiling. No disrespect to Noah Brown, but Xavier Hutchinson can be a player that Houston really may love to use down the field. I think the future of this wide receiving group is very interesting simply because they have a bunch of guys on the roster right now that are knowns that we believe can be very good for this team. But you got that one guy when we look at Nico Collins, and our thought process is if Nico becomes the number one receiver for this team, then the rest of it should fall in line, right? So I think it's important to put that out there. But in terms of Tank, Hutchinson, again, I'm going to throw out Jerry Wayne. Yeah, Houston has an opportunity to really grow in-house, right? Kind of get them right. There's no rush here, simply because I think each of those players, they have a guy in front of them that Houston can kind of lean on right now. And I am truly interested to see where does Amari Rodgers fall on this depth chart. I do, because he's a vet, played some good games for Houston last year. Does he have a higher upside than Tank Dell? That's a question. Does Noah Brown, again, does Robert Woods have a higher upside than Xavier Hutchinson? As of right now, we know that Houston wants Robert Woods to be out on their field. So I don't really want to include him. But Brown and Hutchinson, who has a bigger upside? Does Houston benefit in the long run from kind of stashing Hutchinson away and getting him ready, getting him right for the future? I think so. I really do. it's interesting because, as you put it, Cody, in years past, there's been, like, we go recently, Brandon Cooks, and then who else? DeAndre Hopkins, and then who else?
It should have been Will Fuller, but he was always hurt.
Right, and then we had the 1 year where it was Fuller and Cooks together when we thought Fuller was going to get 1,000 yards, and then he got hit with the PED RICO charge. So it's interesting to see how, the wide receiver coach and DeMeco Ryans and Bobby Slowick says, you know what, there's no rush to get this guy on the field. We like him, obviously. We brought him in, but let's in-house grow the guy first, right? And then maybe at some point throughout the year, we'll see Hutchinson taking those snaps, right? I wouldn't be shocked if Hutchinson beats out a couple of these vets, honestly. But I wouldn't be shocked if he's not getting a lot of playing time early on. Would be. They got two guys in Brown and Woods that they know fit into their offense. They got one guy that they gave a lot of money to. Brown is a guy that I could see, honestly, not being on this team. And if he's not on this team, my question is, okay, who beat him out? And that's where we look at camp and say, oh, man, was it Hutchinson? Did Hutchinson go out there and did he take everything he learned during OTAs and mini camps and in terms of how to be a blocker out on the edge as a wide receiver and use that to beat out Brown? Or was he just able to make plays down the field consistently? Or, things like that is where it gets interesting. But Houston is in a good place right now in terms of wide receiver because there isn't real expectations. And I'm not only one of the few guys that say they can win this division, but you can still look towards the future to go get your number one receiver. So let us some guys learn. Let us some guys grow. It's not a problem.
Before getting out of here on this Wednesday installment of Locked On Texans, John, listeners and viewers, on yesterday, the Houston Texans made it official. The contract extension for Malik Collins, 2-year deal. I think it's very team friendly. I like the fact that they was able to get that deal done before the start of training camp. But as of right now, the Houston Texans have a total of 34 contracts set to expire in 2024. Out of those 34 players, 20 players are returning players. John, I do want to take a look at some of these names and kind of predict who could be the next player in line to get an extension, not named Titus Howard and Steven Nelson, because we had talked about those two individuals a lot over the last couple of weeks. Some noticeable names that you might want to consider: Jerry Hughes, Christian Kersey, which I think I already know your opinion about that one, Desmond King, Tavier Thomas, and Scott Quisenberry.
It comes down to King and Tavier for me.
Yeah, me too.
Straight up and down.
I think, and this is why I hate OTAs and mandatory minicamp.
Are you about to say Scott Quisenberry?
Only because he did look good as the center, and he was their best center. Just go back and take a look at Locked On Texans.
He was the only center because Justin Britt got up out of here.
Well, I'm not talking about last year. I'm just talking about how good he looked playing center last week. But once again, shorts and T-shirts. That's why I'm like, I want to say Scott Quisenberry, but at the same time, don't do that. He had his moments last year. He looked good and he looked bad. And from what I've been able to see throughout OTAs and mandatory minicamp, he did look better. That's why I want to save him for training camp or whatever the case might be. But yeah, I agree with you, man. Desmond King and Tavier Thomas.
Those are the two guys. I thought Houston would address the cornerback position this year draft, but they didn't. And I think they got some. I think they like Tavier. I think they like Desmond King. We talked about Steven Nelson, but moving forward, it's out of King, out of that list. It's out of King and Tavier Thomas, man. I mean, for Christian Kersey, I think Houston needs to go ahead and explore moving on from him right now. They'll save him $5 million. The Malik Collins deal saved Houston about $2.2 million in cap space. So you add another 5 on that. Maybe you have some money where, depending on who gets cut during the preseason or maybe some in-season decisions that you want to make, you have some money saved up to go do that. But I don't think, and out of those two, out of Tavier and Desmond King, I'd go Desmond King.
I think tomorrow's show, we should call it Survival of the Fittest. Because outside of Derek Stingley Jr., Steven Nelson, Shaq Griffin, Desmond King, and Tavierre Thomas are all on one-year deals. I can see a situation where only 2 of those cornerbacks survives. I could see one cornerback getting an extension in season, and then that's just probably going to leave room for one more of the remaining 3. But I think that's something we should definitely look at for tomorrow's show.
All right. There it is. Thank you guys for checking out today's episode of the Locked On Texan Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texan Podcast, and follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans. Make sure you give me a follow as well at John_Hickman12.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at Cody Davis _24. Once again, that's Cody COTY DAVIS _24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.